Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, the political dragon here in the Bronx, New York. Today is July 25th, 2024, and it's approximately 10:30 in the morning, and I wanted to talk about an issue that I think is very important, something that is topical and in the news right now, is whether or not Kamala Harris is a DEI hire, a diversity, equity, inclusion checkbox candidate, or is she qualified to be president? It's a very interesting conversation, and it's very heated, and I think we need to really look at that before this election moves any further forward. Now, before we get to that, I do want to mention, if this is the first time that you're seeing our channel, we welcome you. We thank you for being part of our audience. We want you to know that we do long-form political commentary. And every Sunday, we do a live stream with you. We reach out on every social media platform that we can to hear your voice, your chat, your text, your phone calls, to talk to us about what you think is important from anywhere around the world, as the politics affect all of us. And we hope that you'll join us every Sunday for our Sunday live stream. Kamala Harris is a very divisive figure in American politics and has been for quite some time. And it has very little to do with the 2024 election and everything that has led up to that. But let's look at this for a moment. We have to go backwards in time to be able to move forwards with this conversation. Kamala Harris is controversial both in her time as a DA, her time as AG, her time as senator, and also her time as vice president. She has a lot of baggage, and she has many issues behind her. How did she get into politics? Well, it's very well known that she had an affair with Willie Brown, a very prominent figure in California politics. And because of that affair, she was able to become DA, which got her the AG position, which got her to be into the Senate, and was able to get her to the vice presidency. That's just facts. People don't like to point out those facts, that controversial background, but that is her background. That is how she got into politics. And that is a factor, because the moral backbone of a candidate is a factor in elections. It just is. But that has nothing to do with whether or not she's black or whether or not she's a DEI hire. That's just, is she a good moral person? You can answer that question for yourself. I won't be delving into that, but that is her background. Nor will I go into the question about whether or not she's a cop, which many people on the left have issue with. We won't be addressing the fact that she's done many things that are controversial, like not allowing a death row prisoner to be released as they should be, to hold prisoners longer than they should be, her flip-flopping on legalizing marijuana. These are issues that we've already heard, and many will talk about as this election goes forward. That really doesn't affect the DEI question, the diversity, equity, inclusion issue. So I'm not really going to delve into them. But these are components of her past and her present, and whether or not someone might want to vote for her. And we do invite people to delve into that history to learn more. No, rather, we want to deal with, and in fact, as you can see on the screen, I have one of her other more recent controversies when she, as vice president, when she went to South Korea and embarrassed the United States, wiping her hands after shaking the hand of the South Korean president on international news media, causing an uproar and increasing difficulties and tensions between the United States and our ally, South Korea. So she has a very complicated past. And that past is complicated even more when we talk about whether or not Kamala Harris is black, and whether or not that has any impact on her running for the 2024 election. So let's try and look at that a little bit more directly. One of the first things we have to ask is Kamala Harris black? It's a very straightforward question. Is she black? And the answer to that question, first and foremost, is yes, she's black, but she's not African American. That difference for many people may be moot, but it isn't. It is a factor because we have seen that Kamala Harris has used her racial background as a tool in her elections, switching between being black or being Indian or being Asian, as is best in the polling and in the election results. Whichever one has worked best for her, she's emphasized at any given time, even though the news media has mostly focused on her being categorized as black. Now, let me take a moment to address that. What do I mean by she's black? What is it to be black in general? Let's take a look at what was being said on Vox in 2020. Now, this is an article from December 2019 by Vox, a far left-leaning website, and they were addressing the question about her ethnicity in this statement. Harris is only the second African-American woman to serve in the Senate, and her entry into the 2020 race is potentially historic. If she secures the nomination, she'd be the first African-American woman and the first Asian-American woman to become a major party nominee. So they've identified her as African-American, and it's because African-American is a category used by the media. It's a shorthand, as we see from this article in August of 2020, saying that if Kamala Harris is also of Asian descent, why does the press only label her as black, which is the most common way you will see her presented? Because it's common practice to point out the first this, the first that, whether it's the first woman, the first black, the first Latino, the first openly gay. It is a banner, a label that is used by the left to try and motivate the left to vote. But is it actually a qualification? No. It is a characteristic, but it's not a qualification. There is a big difference between the two. Let me try and clarify what I mean there. There is nothing inherently beneficial in being a woman or black or Asian or Indian or anything else. These are characteristics of an individual. Many of them are inherent. You're born with the skin tone that you have. You're born to a family that has an ethnic background of whatever it may be. These things do not mean that you are better or worse than anyone else, especially in America. They're not intrinsic traits. They don't make you smarter or make your decisions better or make you a more moral individual. They have no substance to them. They're just categories that people can point to and quickly identify. And under DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, they are used to elevate individuals over other individuals. They're part of that equity, which is the division of human beings, the categorization of individuals by their characteristics and ranking individuals by those characteristics, some which are more politically preferential than others at any given moment. As an example, being trans and a person of color is a higher equity ranking than just being a woman or just being a male or being heterosexual or some combination of those. Again, it's very arbitrary, but for the left, it's very important. But these are characteristics. These aren't inherent traits of an individual. They aren't the qualifications of individuals. And that's a problem. So we know that Kamala Harris is black, but she's not African American. Let me clarify that. This is going to PolitiFact. Now, PolitiFact pointed out, and this is an article from August of 2020, and in there, in going over the background of Kamala Harris, they happen to mention, is Kamala Harris black? Absolutely. Is she African American? Not really. See, if you were to ask most Jamaicans, if you were to ask most individuals from Angola or Chad or Nigeria, are they black? Many of them will say yes, they are black. That's a color of skin. It's a race of human being. Are they African American? Now, that's a cultural categorization. That has to do with a specific cultural identity. That has nothing to do with color of skin or genetics. So, is Kamala Harris African American? Probably not, by most people's standards, and often in her own statements as she's run for various political offices, depending on which speech you look at. Because Jamaicans aren't African American. They're black, they're not African American, because they're not Americans to start off with. So there's your first obstacle there. Same thing with being Indian. You're not American, so therefore you're not African American. Same thing can be said about being Asian. Again, that's not culturally, societally, that's not American. That's something other. So that doesn't change the fact that she's black, but that doesn't mean she's culturally African American. And very often, she has said she isn't. So it seems confusing, I'm sure, to many people, but it's very clear. In black culture in America, it's very clear that there is a big difference between African American and black. And voters react to that, which is part of the reason why there is such an emphasis right now in the mainstream media to highlight that Kamala Harris is black, to get the black vote, to help push her forward and get her support so that she can hopefully win for Democrats and win the 2024 election. But it's kind of ginned up. Again, this is the shorthand that we're seeing that has been created by the news media. And it is based on a superficial construct that has no substance behind it. These aren't intrinsic qualifications. So whether or not Kamala Harris wants to say at any given day that she is or is not African American, or she wants to focus on whether or not she's black, has nothing to do with whether or not she's the most qualified person for any elected office. It has nothing to do with whether she would be good or bad at the job. It's just a label where she can say, I'm the first, which is very important to many on the left, not so important for everyone else. Because again, it has nothing to do with qualification. It has to do with non-substantive characteristic. I hope I've made that part clear, because I think it's important. It's an important distinction, because in this conversation about DEI, people are getting wrapped up in the emotion behind it or what has been attached to it. And I think that's a distraction that's really not positive. I mean, looking at what we see, let me go to what we've seen so far. We know that back in 2021, Kamala Harris, and since, has not been well liked by Democrats or the public at large. That is just a fact. Even as vice president, for much of her presidency or vice presidency, she has been, she's had an approval rating lower than even Dan Quayle when he made his famous potato scandal. And that's just a fact, and we covered that back in 2021 at the time. But going by even the far left, going to 538, another left-leaning website, and looking at their tracking of the approval rating for Kamala Harris, we've seen that she has a 51.4% disapproval rate. People don't like Kamala Harris, and they have consistently not liked Kamala Harris throughout the Biden-Harris administration. In fact, we recently did a short video going over the fact that the current revisioning of Kamala Harris's past is artificial and inaccurate. As case in point, we've seen that Senator Chris Murphy has tried to deny, well, as have many Democrats, that Kamala Harris wasn't the border czar, which is factually incorrect. She was named by the news media multiple times, even on the left, as a border czar. We know for a fact that on March 24th, 2021, Joe Biden assigned Kamala Harris, vice president, the position of taking care of the southern border. That was her job. Immigration was her focus, her first and only job, and she's failed. 8 million illegal aliens have entered into America. Over 225 known or suspected terrorists have entered America under the Biden-Harris administration. She was in charge of the southern border. She failed. But we now have revisioning happening amongst the media and many Democrats to try and say, well, it's not her fault. She wasn't in charge of that, even though we factually know she was. This is all because Kamala Harris needs help. Her election is in trouble. Her potential nomination and the potential 2024 general election is in trouble. As we can see currently in the polling, the most recent polling in a five-way outlook, we see that we see that Dr. Cornel West and Jill Stein, they remain at about the same level as when Joe Biden was in the race, about 1.5%. They're not factors. They won't make a difference. We see that Robert F. Kennedy has taken a drop. He's taken a hit. With Joe Biden out of the race, many Democrats who were looking for an alternative to Joe Biden because of perceived weakness, because of perceived failures in his policies, because of his mental state, many Democrats were abandoning the Democratic ticket and went to the alternative, the independent RFK Jr. Since we've seen most recently, now that Joe Biden is no longer a factor, some of those Democrats are switching back to the Democratic ticket, but not in large numbers. Kennedy still remains at 7.8%. It's about 2 points, almost 3 points lower than when Joe Biden was in the race, where he was at about 10%. So that's been the boost for Harris. That has been the boost for Democrats. But that still only puts her at about 40%. Only about 1.5 points higher than where Joe Biden was when Joe Biden was told by Nancy Pelosi, by Chuck Schumer, and many other Democrats there was no path to victory for him, which is why he dropped out of the race. There is no path. And Kamala Harris only is ranked, currently, she is only getting in polls 1.5% better than what Joe Biden was getting, which would lead us to believe that if Joe Biden had no path to victory and Kamala Harris is essentially at the same level as Joe Biden was, she also lacks a path to victory. There is no support behind her, even though we're seeing the full court crush coming from news media and many Democrat elites trying to revision and recharacterize her as someone who must win. But the fact is, Donald Trump is still the odds hands-on favorite, and he currently has a 2.8% lead on Kamala Harris, which is almost the same lead he had on Joe Biden. So again, he looks like he's going to win. And again, Kamala Harris, her approval rating has dropped since Joe Biden getting out of the race. In fact, it has been consistently dropping since Joe Biden had his debate with Donald Trump. So for over a month now, we have seen that she has been increasing her disapproval rate as more people look at her. And we are seeing that the left, for their part, have attributed this to the fact that Kamala Harris is black, and therefore this is about race. They're changing the subject. They're changing the issue to make it more emotional so that people are emotionally reacting rather than acting based on substance and qualifications. They're instead reacting on characteristics and feelings. Now, how does that play out to the question of DEI? Well, we see that GOP Representative Tim Burchett was one of the first in the GOP, one of the first elected officials to turn around and say that Kamala Harris is a DEI vice president. Diversity, equity, inclusion, that those were the major factors in her position. And he said, and quoted by NBC News 3 days ago, saying, "The media propped up this president, lied to the American people for 3 years, and then dumped him for our DEI president." Now, the first part of that cannot be disputed. The media has propped up Joe Biden. They've tried to make him look far more intelligent and capable than he is. They've tried to minimize the inflation, the unemployment increase, the number of wars that we are fighting. The many issues of the Biden administration have been downplayed for the last 3.5 years. That's a fact. It is also a fact that the media and Democrats, leading Democrats, have lied to the American people, and very likely for 3 years in total, but at least most recently, about the mental state of Joe Biden. That has come out, and we now know that Joe Biden is a part-time president, only working 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, as president only between the hours of 10 a.m. and 4 p.m., which really isn't adequate for the position. And we do, as a side note, we do believe that the 25th Amendment should be enacted to remove Joe Biden, since he is incapable of the duties of the presidency. That being said, we see that Representative Tim Burchett went on to say that he referred to Harris as a DEI hire in a briefing on Monday, telling CNN that during the 2020 campaign, Joe Biden said, quote, he was going to hire a black female for president. Burchett asks, what about white females? What about any other group? Now, NBC then goes on to say that Biden said in a March 2020 Democratic debate that he'd choose a female running mate, but did not mention race or ethnicity. Now, that's not entirely correct. We will get to that, and we will debunk that statement, because we know for a fact that prior to selecting Kamala Harris, Joe Biden did say that he was going to specifically hire a black female. That is a fact covered by NPR, NBC, and all the other major news. We will get to that. But the reaction to Tim Burchett was by Susan Rice, a former cabinet member of the Obama Biden administration, said that calling Harris a DEI hire is insulting, incredibly insulting. And she said it's, and I quote, extremely offensive and dehumanizing, as she said to CNN's Wolf Blitzer. And I get it. I can get that people say, and she said, women, people of color, immigrants, LGBTQ, people with disabilities or veterans, and religious minorities face attacks based on being called DEI, and messaging from Republicans if those people, quote, achieve success, rose to a position of leadership, you didn't deserve it. You didn't get there on merit. You got there because of some unfair advantage, end quote. And that's why it's insulting to many people. Let's stop for a second and let's remember that this is essentially affirmative action on steroids. It's the modern day version of affirmative action with a bit of adrenaline added into it. And this is something that progressives are very much in favor of: diversity, equity, inclusion. Something that the Biden administration has focused on since the day he got into office and signed over 40 executive orders. One of those pushing the United States government to hire and promote individuals based on diversity, equity, and inclusion, not merit. And that's the big issue that many people have about DEI. It isn't based on merit. And that's why we see many people say, you haven't achieved a success, or there is an asterisk attached to it saying, you're not qualified, you didn't deserve this. It's a big question. It's a very important question. Are you qualified for the job? Now, in particular, when we talk about this, we have to ask the question, well, are you qualified for the president? Well, of course she is. Kamala Harris is qualified for the presidency. She's an American and she has the right age. That's the qualifications you need. Do you fit the age? Are you an American citizen? Have you committed any high crime or misdemeanor that would prevent you from being president? If the answer is yes, you qualify, then you qualify. 100 million Americans qualify to run for the presidency. That doesn't mean they're the best choice for president or even to run for president. They don't have the merit for that. There's a big difference between the two, which is being thrown to the wayside to focus on characteristics rather than substance. And that's why we see people like Susan Rice and many Democrats turning the question into DEI is about racism rather than about substance. Is Kamala Harris the best choice? Or is she the choice with the most check boxes? There's a big difference in those arguments. One is based on characteristics and emotion. The other is about meritocracy. And I think that's important. In fact, that was an argument that was being had most recently on The Hill, on Rising, the program from The Hill on YouTube. And we can see that Robbie and Jessica are having a debate about this. And I want you to hear this part.
DEI stuff?
I think it's perfectly fine. It's not to denigrate her, obviously, for her race or her gender. She is perfectly qualified. But the Democrats put themselves in the position when they said, or when the media made them say, we're going to pick a black woman to be the vice president. That gave rise to the idea that she was selected specifically for that job because of some demographic identity-based reason.
Robbie is absolutely correct in his argument. Robbie's absolutely correct that Kamala Harris was picked because she's a black woman. And yes, of course, she had the correct age. And yes, she's an American citizen. And yes, she hadn't committed any high crimes and misdemeanors. So she's qualified. But was she the best candidate? And many people would say no. In fact, we know that 95% of Democrats in 2019 said that Kamala Harris wasn't the best candidate, that she wasn't the most qualified. She did not have the merit to be president. That's why she dropped out of the race, one of the first individuals to do so 2 months before any of the primaries. She had no support. She ran out of money. Democrats did not want her. She only had 5% support the day that she dropped out of the race. So she's not the best candidate, at least going by the 2020 election. And we've seen very little to make us believe that she would be a better candidate today. And I want to emphasize that most Americans agree with this, that merit is important. Looking at a Gallup poll from 2016, most people in the United States oppose colleges considering race in admissions. Now, in this poll by Gallup, we see that 50% of blacks favor people being allowed into colleges based on merit, not race. Because to pick someone based on their race is diminishing of that person. Americans, quoting the poll itself, Americans continue to believe colleges should admit applicants based solely on merit. 70% of Americans, regardless of color, agree that people should be in college or have positions because of merit, of their ability, their substance, not their characteristics. And it goes on to say, quote, rather than taking into account applicants' race and ethnicity in order to promote diversity. Now, 26% believe diversity is more important, that the characteristics, the check boxes, are more important than actual ability, which is your merit. That is the minority view. That is the progressive and often Democrat view. And that's also what we're seeing with Kamala Harris, that many people are looking at the diversity rather than the merit, that she doesn't have the qualifications or the best qualifications for the job. We see that taking a look at 2019, the majority of Americans believe race shouldn't be a factor in hiring. This is a Pew poll, a Pew Research Center study, and they found that 75% of adults believe it is very or somewhat important for companies and organizations to promote diversity. Of course, America believes in diversity, but more than 70% of adults believe racial and ethnic diversity should not be taken into account during the hiring and promotion process, and only qualifications should be considered, even if that means you get a less diverse result. Now, let's think about that, because from 2016 to 2019, and I believe well on beyond that, Americans are very much into meritocracy. The best should be at the top. They should get the job. They should get the promotion. They should be elected to office because they earned it. They are the best. And those should be the only people that should be considered in those options in terms of being hired and promoted or elected. The best, not the most check boxes, not the most characteristics, but the most substance, the most merit. It's something that has been very consistent amongst Americans and something that has been very opposed by progressives and their progressive ideology. This came up very prominently when talking about Ketanji Brown Jackson, who became Supreme Court Justice. Many people had an issue with her because she's not the most qualified individual. She had the most check boxes. She had the most characteristics for the position, but she wasn't the most qualified. As we covered in detail at the time, this is from one of our videos on that, talking about how people were looking at Ketanji Brown Jackson before she was nominated to the Supreme Court. How much have you seen, read, or heard about her? And out of 2004 registered voters, what we see is that 40% of the people have no idea who she is. In fact, looking at Politico and speaking about the poll that was just done, we see that 46% of voters say they want to see Jackson confirmed. 46% of voters that they spoke to want to see her confirmed, but the overwhelming majority of voters, 28%, have never heard of her and don't have an opinion of her. So people are picking just Judge Jackson because of the color of her skin, because of her gender, because of the equity. And that's it. As we can see in the polling, and this is from 2022. Ketanji Brown Jackson wasn't being picked because she was the best. In fact, we know from many articles during the time, and again, we covered this at the time, we know that there were at least 7 other black women Democrat judges with far more experience, far more qualifications than Ketanji Brown Jackson. The one thing they didn't have was that they were too old. They were older by 20 years than Ketanji Brown Jackson, and Democrats wanted someone to fill the seat of Justice Breyer that would be able to be there for that additional 20 years. They wanted someone who would be there longer, since it is a lifetime position. And that's why she was picked. She was the youngest of those black Democrat judges that could be picked. She also had the least experience because she was the youngest, and in addition, she also had some of the largest questions and issues about many of her judgments. But people were picking her because she was black, because she's a woman, because she had the right characteristics, and for fear of being called a sexist or racist, people would support her, but she wasn't the best choice. And that's the problem. That's the inherent problem. And even if someone wants to make the argument, and many have, that Ketanji Brown Jackson was the best choice possible, what we know for a fact is there were more qualified individuals and they were overlooked. We know that the environment when she was selected by Joe Biden was about her. It had to be a black woman. It had to be a Democrat. It had to be someone who had progressive leanings. It had to be someone who was young. These are characteristics, not qualifications. But they limited themselves to those characteristics. And so the best person to fill those characteristics and had merit would be selected, which is very limiting. It's not the best person. You cannot flat out say Ketanji Brown Jackson was the best. She was the best with those qualifications, those check marks, those non-substantive reasons behind her. She's the best of that limitation, not the best. And there's a big difference. And that's why DEI is seen as being so controversial and so problematic. Because it's not the best person, it's the best person with those limitations. Let's go back to 2020. And let's address the question about Kamala Harris and when she was picked. Because we've been told, well, it's not, there was never a question about her being the best qualified. It's not true. Or that Joe Biden wasn't under pressure to pick a very limited category of individuals. We can see in June 12th of 2020, pressure grows on Joe Biden to pick a black woman as his running mate. And we see, and I quote, this is from late April, more than 200 black women who are leaders and activists within the Democratic Party signed an open letter to the presumptive Democratic nominee, Joe Biden, calling on him to select a black woman as his running mate. So automatically, we know that they are looking at a limitation. It's not the best candidate, but the best black woman. That they've already put in characteristics to filter out many individuals. There may be a great Asian man who could have run with Joe Biden, filtered out. Could have been a great white man or a great white woman that was running who had more merit, more qualifications to run with Joe Biden, but they were filtered out as well. No, it had to be a black woman. So now we have several filters in here who say that doesn't mean they're the best person. They're the best one with those characteristics. And the quote is, and I quote, "It is a fact that the road to the White House is powered by black women, and black women are the key to a Democratic victory in 2020. So this is about impression. This is about politics, about emotion, because they're very much concerned about the black vote, about the woman vote. And they look, that is DEI right there. This is why they say that Kamala Harris is a DEI candidate, because their concern was black women, women in general, black voters in general. That's why she was picked, because that's why they had a vice president. It wasn't because they're the best with the limitations. In fact, not only did NPR highlight this, but we can go to NBC News and Joy Reid. Biden says that 4 black women are on his VP list, but he wouldn't commit to which one he's going to choose or if he would choose them. But in that discussion with NBC News and Joy Reid, he says, quote, "Black women have supported me my whole career. I have been loyal and they have been loyal to me. And so it's important that my administration, I promise you, will look like America." He added, "Both from vice president to Supreme Court to cabinet positions to every major position in the White House, it's critically important that that be the case." So again, he's putting this limitation in, that these individuals have to be black and they have to be women. It's a quid pro quo. They voted for him. He's going to put one of them in his cabinet and give them high-ranking positions. Not because they were the best, but because it was politically expedient, that it was politically beneficial, not because they had the best qualifications and that it was obvious that they were the best choice. There is a limitation built into this, and this is from July 20th of 2020. So there is no way that Democrats can argue, oh, well, Joe Biden, he didn't pick her because of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. In fact, he did. He was pressured by Democrats to do so. He spoke to the public and told them that he would do so, that this was a quid pro quo, that this was about characteristics, limitations, and not meritocracy. When we look at these factors, we come to a recurring theme. There is the racial component, which is being promoted by Democrats to distract people by saying, oh, it's racist to say the truth, to point out the flaws in the system that Democrats have used to promote Kamala Harris. She wasn't the most popular Democrat ever. She wasn't the most popular vice president ever. Her qualifications, while they're generic, every American has them, nothing about her specific qualifications elevate her to be the best choice, unless you put in the limiting factors of race and gender and political preference. And only then does she start to rise up, and even then the argument can be made that she's not the best. But this isn't about racism, this is about qualifications. But people want to focus on the race, the racial element of that, because it is very emotional and they want people to vote based on emotions. Now, I say that because we see this article from Tariq Nasheed. Now, Tariq has this quote. He's showing a recent video clip of Kamala Harris going out and buying several jazz records. And he mentions that this is a desperate attempt to manufacture a culturally black background for Kamala. And it's laughable because many people who are black, and some people go by the foundational black American families, that means descendants of slaves in America. It's a progressive way of looking at this, but many black Americans descended from slavery already have these records and many types of these type of records for many years. So why would she purchase them now if this is her style of music? If this is something that she believes in, if she likes it, if this is what she wants, it seems odd that she would specifically buy these records, this style of records, and highlight them for the news media in a photo op if it wasn't for the fact that she was trying to make an emotional plea to voters. I'm like you. You should vote for me. You should support me because I do the same things you do. It's kind of insulting. It really is. And what we had to say about that was, when has the news media ever asked a presidential candidate what music they buy. Have you ever heard anyone ask Donald Trump what music he listens to? President Bush, Ronald Reagan, looking at Jimmy Carter, Clinton. No, Kamala, Barack Obama. Did anyone ask them, what music are you listening to? What records are you buying? No one asked that. And the reason why they don't ask that is it's not substantive. It's quantitative. It's not quality. It's equity. It's showmanship. It's insubstantial. It is a distraction and a plea to emotions. It's marketing, but it's not a criteria for presidency. It has nothing to do with that. And this is how you get cheap votes, because it's meant to sway those emotions and to motivate people to say, well, Kamala Harris is obviously black, therefore I must vote black to support her. Why? She's not the best candidate, because her music selection has nothing to do with how she's going to be involved in getting back American hostages from Hamas. It has nothing to do with inflation being up over 25%. It has nothing to do with the fact that unemployment is rising and currently at 4.1% and increasing. It has nothing to do with the southern border and 8 million illegal aliens entering into America. Whether she's listening to jazz or rock or punk or rap, it doesn't matter. It has no influence on any of those things that are absolutely critical to the United States. So why are we bothering to pay attention to it? It's kind of like with Joe Biden going and getting ice cream. It's the same thing. It's meant to make people feel comfortable, to feel good about this candidate, to have an emotional connection to them, but it has nothing to do with substance. It has no reflection on substance. You may like the same ice cream that Joe Biden does, but Joe Biden isn't a mental giant at this time, and he's failing at his job. Look at the world environment. Look at the environment in the United States. He's failed. So the fact that he likes the same ice cream as you, does that change anything? The fact that Kamala Harris likes the same music as you or has the same skin tone as you, does that change anything? No, because it's not substantive. So I've gone on and on about this, and hopefully someone, if you've made it this far, I really appreciate your time in listening to this discussion, and I hope whether you like it or not has nothing to do with whether you find it of value, if you find it important. I've tried very much to separate emotion from fact. I've tried very hard to make sure this isn't about race or race baiting, but rather about the character and the qualifications. Is Kamala Harris qualified to be president? Yes, so is 100 million other Americans. That's not unique. Is she the most qualified person to be president? Apparently, no. Not without additional filters and limitations being built in. Those filters being race and gender and ideology. That doesn't mean she's the best. And because she has been promoted continuously based on her gender, her race, and her political ideology, that's why she's a DEI hire. Because she's not the best. By a long shot. And that's not something that I'm making up based on the 2020 results. When she dropped out of the presidential race, Democrats said that. Based on the results from 538 as of 2 days ago, she's not. That's why she has a 51% disapproval rate. She's not the best. And yet she's being promoted. And we are watching history be rewritten to try and make you think that she's the best that has ever been. She's basically Ray. Somehow, Kamala Harris has become Ray Palpatine and being promoted as the bestest ever. And we know for a fact she's not. Let me end this with this question. If you separate your emotions and you remove the filters that have been placed to help Kamala Harris, without considering whether or not she's black or whether or not she's African American, throwing that out the window, ignoring the fact whether she's a woman or not, throwing that out the window, looking at her ideology and her statements, as well as her actual actions, her performance as Vice President of the United States, do you believe she is the best to be the Democratic nominee? Is there no other Democrat that has better performance in elected office? Is there no argument that is better made by other Democrats than Kamala Harris? That's a question only you can answer. Do you think she's the best choice for president? Again, without any of the limitations and filters that diversity, equity, and inclusion demand must be used to prop her up, to buoy any of her weaknesses and any of her failures. When you take that away, is she the best choice for president of the United States based on what she has done and what her experience, what her track record has said? You may have different mileage on that answer than I do. To me, the answer would be no. But you may think differently. And again, this has nothing to do with Donald Trump. This has nothing to do with Republicans. This has nothing to do with anything except Kamala Harris herself. If you think that we're wrong, that Kamala Harris is not a diversity, equity, inclusion, a DEI hire, why? Why isn't? What has she done? What empirical fact proves that she isn't just the right set of categories, the right set of check boxes? What's your reasoning? We look forward to seeing some of the comments, and we look forward to seeing you with us on our Sunday live stream. Thank you.